right, so welcome to another chat with passionate people, and in this case, Michael Jackson.
Very nice.
We haven't been using this all that much yet, have we?
Well, I think
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
That was huge.
That was huge. But if the conversation sort of just stops,
yeah, it would just liven it up.
Yeah, I mean, we have all the fancy stuff here. Like,
I just forget which thing is which again.
Do we have like really loud applause?
yeah, that's the fourth one or the third one.
It's the
second row and then left.
That was great. Try
Yeah. The one next to that.
That was not it.
The one next to that, that's going to be
was
the
a
applause.
conference about Vue. Womp womp.
Yeah.
Second row, first thing.
I mentioned Vue on stage, and I did not get booed.
No.
Oh, really?
No, everybody was like okay with it. I was like, it must be in Netherlands or something.
Was it more like?
No, it wasn't that either. No, not quite. No, it was more just like
Medium enthusiasm.
Yeah, it was like, huh.
Or did people think it was just a really, really bad joke?
Well, what did you expect that would happen?
Well, no, I mean, just, I thought I might get a rise out of people,
Yeah.
Say like, hey, yeah, because this is a React conference. And I was just like, yeah, in your remix app, like, maybe someday you'll be able to run Vue, I think I was kind of hoping for like one guy in the back to stand up and be like, yes!
Just to be so excited about
Yeah,
it.
That's a nice way or a nice idea for bringing it up, right? That someone would go like, yes, I've been waiting for this.
Yeah. It was
super cool.
I had visions, but they did not happen.
Okay.
But anyway.
But like run it in your remix app.
Yeah. So the whole idea, right, is when I first had this idea of remix, the idea was like you can mix together whatever technologies you want, right? I mean, we're just at the end of the day, we're all just building web apps, and it feels kind of funny to me that we have people like that get into these different camps, and they're like, "Aha, you're a React developer. Oh, I'm not a React developer. React sucks. I'm a Angular developer. Yeah, Angular is the best thing." And I think it's just a web app. It's just a web page. I mean, at the end of the day, you're just building HTML and CSS and JavaScript just like everybody else. So, can't we just can't we nail the core of the web experience? Because every web app has to do the exact same thing. Every web app is loading data, is loading assets, is manipulating data, mutations. That's the important stuff. And at the end of the day, all of that looks the same. They're network requests and when you load things. And then the React part, or whether you're using Vue or Angular, is more just sort of like, what is your preference as a developer? That doesn't say very much about what the rest of your stack is at all.
So how do you see micro front ends factor into that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think micro front ends as an idea. I think honestly, I think micro front ends are kind of like an organizational solution to an organizational challenge that you have.
So on what level are we thinking challenges?
Well, yeah. So you've got when your organization is very small, right? You're like, oh yeah, we can all agree sort of how we want to write our apps. Well, then as your organization grows, and then you have like different teams, and maybe those teams like don't even eat lunch together anymore, and they like live in different places they live in different offices, or maybe they're spread out across the world, and maybe they work on completely different products, and they have a completely different task tracker, and you know what I'm saying? Like these teams have grown so far apart that they actually start writing code differently, and then this team A hires somebody who really likes Vue, whereas that has been a React app completely up to that point. And then and he convinces, some of the people on the team like, hey, Vue is really cool. We should actually write it. And I hired my coworker from my last company, and she likes Vue too. So like, we're going to be writing stuff in Vue now. And I think that's kind of where micro front ends come in, right? Is in a large company, you have these different teams that want to use different stacks. And the idea of micro front ends is, okay, we need everybody to have some sort of degree of autonomy over what they're working on. We also need to ship a single app together, different features, but we're all building a single app. So we have to find a way to stitch them together. So I think that's kind of where micro front ends come in. I have to be totally transparent and say that I've never actually worked. I mean, I worked on the Twitter app, but we were using a mix of like vanilla JavaScript and jQuery back at that point in time.
jQuery, wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
this was like 2012. So I've never actually worked on a micro front ends app. So somebody could come along and say like, no, you're totally wrong. Micro front ends are completely different. Like there's a completely different reason for it. But from the people that I've talked to who are using micro front ends, who are advocating front ends, it seems to be a solution to an organizational challenge that they're having.
Okay. So would you say though that it would cater to using your preference to build the same thing? Like as you said, in the end, we're all building web apps, right? That's what we're working towards.
Yeah.
So would micro frontends be, in your eyes, a solution to that, or is it solving a different problem?
Yeah, no, I think it's a slightly different problem. All I was talking about with Remix is, I think there could be a future in Remix where you eventually, you can't do this today. Right now, it's all React, but I think it would be very interesting if you could say, because what we're seeing now is like every front end library is kind of going to the back end. I don't know if you've thought about it that way, but like you look at the React team is working on React server components. You look at the Svelte team, and the Svelte team is working on Svelte kit. You look at the Vue team, and they have Vite or Vite. Nobody knows how to pronounce it, but it's essentially a build, like a dev server and a production. It'll do the production build for you, right? So they've got a bundler, and so it's like all these people started out on the front end building like front end frameworks, and then they have their opinions about like how the server side should be done, right? And so what we're going to end up with is like all of these, front end frameworks with their preferred sort of back end framework, and we're all going to be solving the exact same problems at the end of the day. Like I said, it's about how to serve your JavaScript and serve your styles and render the page, like efficiently in the best way possible. So we're all going to be solving the exact same problems in slightly different ways. And so, Remix is basically like a lot of opinions about how to build a good web app. Should we really have a strong opinion that you run it on? So my talk today, for example, was about running it on multiple different JavaScript runtimes. So you can run Remix on Node, you can run Remix on Cloudflare Workers, you can run it on Dino, which is a completely different runtime. And I don't really care. And I don't really care what JavaScript runtime you choose, because that's your choice. That's your preference. And I think they're all cool and they all have their own strengths and weaknesses, right? And I actually feel the same way about a lot of the front end, technologies that you might use. If you really like Vue, like there could be some really good reasons that you have for you and your team. I really like React. I have my reasons for liking it. But some other teams I'm sure really like Angular, and they have their reasons for liking that too. So I'm not here to judge you and tell you like, oh, you shouldn't use it. You shouldn't use that. React is the coolest thing in the world. I'm a React developer. You should listen to me. I just want you to build good web apps. And that's where I think Remix comes in. And so, just in the same way that you can choose multiple backends for your Remix app right now, I think it would be interesting to be able to choose multiple different front ends.
So Remix is just the tool that allows you to build good web apps, and how you want to do that is up to you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the TLDR.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. So I mean, I keep telling this to a lot of people that we interview. We are sitting here all day. We're talking to people. So unfortunately, we don't always get the opportunity to look at the talks. So I'm fairly new on Remix. I don't know about you. Are you new on Remix?
For me, Remix is quite new as well.
Remix.
Yeah.
Would you mind giving us like the primer on Remix?
100%. Yeah. So I've been working on this library called React Router for a long time. We've been working on it since like 2014, which was like the year after React came out, right? And React now is like very widespread. Everybody uses it. And React Router is used in like 70% of web apps that people are building with React. And we gauge that based on just download numbers from NPM, right? Every time, 7 out of 10 times that somebody installs React DOM, they install React Router as well. So it's this very widely used, JavaScript library, and we've got some opinions about, what makes a good web app. Unfortunately, over the last, number of years since React and React Router have been around, people have built some really bad experiences with it. People have built some really cool stuff with it too. Like, don't get me wrong. There are some of the best web apps. I would actually say probably most of the best apps that you use are built with React or, something similar that takes advantage of, the technological advances that React made. But there are also a lot of really, really bad apps built with React and React Router. So how do we sort of raise the level of all apps? How do we make it easier for everybody to sort of fall into the pit of success? React used to say this thing at the very beginning when React was released, is they would say, hey, we'll help you fall into the pit of success. Just by using React, you're going to have, the chances are very good that you'll have decent performance on your app. And so I feel like what Remix is doing is we're kind of trying to help people do that for their whole app, right? Not just for individual components. So, for example, some things that Remix will do for you, right, is for one, we have a compiler. It's a compiler. It's a lot like Webpack. It's a lot like Rollup. But basically, you just say Remix build, and we will take all of the different pieces of the page of your app, all the different pieces of all the different pages in your app, and we will compile them down into separate bundles. And then what we'll do for you is, we'll do code splitting for you, which is something that most people are probably used to doing these days. Hopefully, most people listening to this podcast are already doing code splitting on their app. I know that back in the day when I was working at Twitter in 2012, we were just loading up a single old global.js and we just called it good. And that thing was like 2 megs. And
just combine everything.
Yeah. Code splitting, who cares? Who even knows what that is? But now
state of the art back in the day, though.
Yeah.
State of the art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now it's pretty easy to do, but that's like an example of something that we'll do for you. And then as you're navigating around the page with, as I said, we're using React Router, and the routes are changing, we'll dynamically load the sections of the page that you need. So the initial load is fast because you only load the bundles that you need for the initial page. And then subsequent pages are also fast because you'll only load the code that you need for those subsequent pages. And we're not just talking about JavaScript component code either. We're talking about HTML, we're talking about CSS, images, icons, fonts, things like that, the assets that you need for that page. So that's an example of one thing that is like not specific to React, right? Not specific to Vue. That's just part of building a good web app. You should probably do some code splitting, and you should probably do some dynamic lazy loading of code that, that so you don't make the user incur the cost of loading everything up front, right? That's just an example of something that Remix will do for you, out of the box. Remix is also a lot of other things. So that's kind of the compiler piece. But Remix is also a server runtime. So we actually use this pattern. It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of like back end for the front end pattern,
yeah.
The BFF pattern. Yeah. Super cool, right? Like you basically just say like, okay, I've got this view on the front end. It needs this data. We have to go and talk to, it could be like a GraphQL API. It could be a database. It could be like a JSON API. It could be whatever. But we're going to go and grab the data, and then we're going to like filter it and sort it down and just send this payload of data down to the client, right? So Remix uses this pattern on its back end, on its server runtime. And again, that's something that, is not like, that's just part of building a good web app. Don't send too much data over the wire when you make a request, right? Because networks are slow and it takes a long time to transfer all those bytes over the wire. So,
data is costly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very costly.
Yeah, if you're on a mobile device or whatever, you're on a network, it could take a long time. It's just part of a good experience is to not make the user incur that cost, right? Another thing that Remix is it's a, so I talked about the server runtime. The gist of my talk today was that you can run Remix anywhere. So another thing that we're seeing, with a lot of these modern cloud providers are developing like custom backends for running JavaScript, like running functions as a service and that kind of thing. And they're not Node.js, which is kind of crazy, right? This kind of blows people's minds. So over the last, let's see, we've been using Node.js since like 2006, I think. It's been around a while.
Been around for a while, yeah.
So all of server-side JavaScript has been Node.js. Pretty much all of server-side JavaScript, the main 99.9% of JavaScript on the server has been Node.js. But but we're starting to see some really big players right now come out with JavaScript runtimes that are not Node.js. Cloudflare, for example, they run 10%, I think, of the internet's traffic through their servers, which is just blows my mind.
That's
like to
insane.
think, yeah,
That's an insane number.
It's an insane amount of traffic. Yeah, they released a runtime called Cloudflare Workers, and it's not Node.js. It's just V8 isolates, which are essentially like these little sandboxes for an instance of V8. And so you know your request comes in, and now you're in this V8 isolate. Well, what APIs do you have available to you there? You know, you don't have all your Node stuff because like some of the Node stuff requires file system access, and some of it requires, you know, sockets and, you know, like different kinds of things. Like, but then you have to ask yourself, like, what do I really need to do in my backend? Maybe all I need to do is hit a JSON API and grab some data and render the page. You know, maybe all I need to do is go and store some data in a key value store, you know, and increment a counter and return the data and saying, here, you have one more thing in your shopping cart because it was an add to cart button or something like that, right? So maybe you don't need all of Node. Maybe you just need to run a little bit of business logic at the edge. And that's the beautiful thing is they're running in over 250 data centers over the world. So, you know, if you deploy your app to Cloudflare Workers, now you're getting responses from the backend in like 50 milliseconds, which is like
That's
really quick.
that's insane.
50
milliseconds.
it's
is
gorgeous.
insane. And that's edge then. Like
Yeah,
whether you are in the States
Yeah.
or in Amsterdam, it doesn't matter.
doesn't matter.
50 milliseconds.
You could be in Australia, and you're getting, you know. I mean, gone are the days where you're hosting your app server in US East, you know, whatever that means, somewhere in Virginia or whatever, and then somebody in Tokyo is like making a request, like you can't do that, right?
Why is this so slow?
Yeah, why is it so slow?
It's taking like 10 years before my request
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
through.
Yeah, and the poor people in Sydney, right? Like, just think about
but
those, our friends
Australia
down there.
Australia is horrible in general when
Yeah.
it comes to like internet speeds and connections.
Yeah, I've been there. It's so anyway, yeah. So Cloudflare, people pushing things to the edge, they're fixing this problem for everybody in the world, right? They're saying, we're going to take your app, we're going to run it within a couple hundred miles of you know 99% of the people who are living on the planet, so that anybody who makes a request to your app is going to talk to a server that is geographically located close to them, and it's not Node.js though, right? So that's
It's just basic, well not basic, but V8 with
Yeah.
a subset of an API exposed.
Yeah.
But that's function specific, I would take it then.
Yeah.
So so it allows you to program not necessarily closer to the metal, but they have taken care of that part so that the response times are more quick.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not the only ones that are doing it. There's another provider. So there's another completely different runtime called Dino.
Dino, we know, yes.
Yeah, Dino's beautiful. And they built a product called Dino Deploy, which is a competitor for Cloudflare Workers. And it's doing a lot of the similar things. Supabase, I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but they just launched an Edge Functions product that was built on top of Dino Deploy. Super rad, but they're like, super rad, Supabase. Anyway. They built this Edge Functions product, and it's on top of Dino Deploy, and the performance is insane. Like if I was AWS, AWS they're not going to be sweating bullets anytime soon. But if I was one of the major cloud providers, and I didn't have a good idea of like what was going on at the edge, I would probably just buy the Dino Deploy people right now if I was AWS.
Because it into the camera, go like,
I'd be like,
cloud providers, take note.
that would be awesome because
Buy
I mean
'em.
it's so good. It's so good.
You heard it here first.
Fastly, those are the links that I was sharing with you right before we started. Fastly is basically compiled SpiderMonkey down to a WASM binary and put it in a little sandbox, and they get 0 millisecond cold starts. I mean, that's something that AWS Lambda has like really struggled with over the years, right? It's a cool technology, but one thing they've struggled with is when a request comes in, how quickly can we boot a new VM to handle the request?
For me, that's magic
Really
anyway.
takes a while.
I'm like the backend developer in the JVM world, so
Yeah.
I'm thinking about 10-second startup times, 20-second startup times. So
Yeah.
like immediate startup times, that's just
Yeah.
But I think that's insane in general, not even for a Java backend developer, but I've spent quite a few projects working with Lambdas and that sort of thing. And the cold start has always been a pain.
Cold start's a killer.
And especially because with cold starts comes the if your API is being used not that often, do you want to keep your function warmed up the entire time? Yes or no? So there are all sorts of caveats that you have to take into consideration. 0 millisecond cold start removes so many barriers in deploying a cloud function and using the cloud function in your product. It's insane.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole new
and it's kind of a buzzkill because the whole reason you're using cloud functions is for the pricing model, right?
Yeah.
Because you said, I don't want to pay for a server to be on all the time.
Yep.
I want to pay for just the compute time that I need.
The time that I need. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't want to pay for it to be on all the time. And so, but if I have to keep it on in order to eliminate this cold start problem, then that kind of eliminates the whole reason for using it in the first place, right?
I mean, it takes away some of it because you have to take into consideration sort of the spin down times, right? So maybe 5 minutes or sorry, the lifetime of a Lambda function. Interesting fact for those who don't know, Lambda half-life, so the function actually lives a half-life, but that's something else, of course.
That's awesome.
That's awesome though. But it takes away some of the pains that you have with running a server constantly, but then still you have to take that into consideration. And it adds a different layer to your application architecture as well, because you have to then think about, okay, how am I going to deal with warming things up and keeping them warm the entire time? What if something fails there? What if then we are facing 2-second response times and our UI then times out or whatever? So all of these extra steps that you have to take, which you no longer have to do with the 0 millisecond cold start time.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But this is SpiderMonkey, which is then
that's a completely different runtime, right?
Port it into Wasm then.
Yeah.
And
It's compiled.
So it's a single binary. This binary can run on basically any system. Or any Unix based system.
So Fastly has some. I already sent you the link, so you can link to it in the show notes. But yeah, they wrote this whole thing about how they did it. But this is just one cloud provider that's doing it this way, right? So as I was building Remix, I was like, okay, there's some seriously cool stuff happening in the server space, right? And it's just gonna keep happening, right? We got the Dino people out there, we got the Fastly people out there, the Cloudflare people putting in serious engineering, getting seriously impressive results. The people at AWS are doing AWS Lambda at Edge, It's not always Node.js. So one thing that I wanted to do in Remix is I would say, I want you to be able to deploy your Remix server anywhere. You don't just deploy it to Node.js. Like, what if you wanted to take advantage of Cloudflare workers and you're using a framework that only runs on Node.js? Or you wanted to take advantage of, Fastly Compute at Edge and you're using, a framework that doesn't run there. Well, then you have to pretty much rewrite your whole backend. Like, you pretty much change your entire programming model just so you can take advantage of a different backend architecture. And so what we did with Remix is we said, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to identify some common primitives, some common abstractions that we can use on the server side that these all share. So for example, we're building servers, so you get requests and response. Well, the browser actually gives you a request and response API as part of the fetch API. When you make a fetch, that's a request, you get back a response object. And you have methods for, reading the headers and reading the body text and the status and things like that and setting them all when you send a response. So we're going to build our API on that. And then we'll polyfill it on Node. So you get to use fetch on Node. But what's interesting about Dino and about Cloudflare workers is they are actually giving you the fetch API out of the box. And there are a lot of web APIs that are making their way to the backends that are being built nowadays. Like, the URL API is another one that you can already use in Node, right? You have the URL global, the URL search params. You can use those APIs in Node for manipulating URLs. That's a browser thing. There's like the web crypto API, for doing cryptography. So Node has its own bespoke, crypto API. You're doing anything in crypto. The web has a crypto API. And so we're going to polyfill that one on Node as well. And by the way, it's already present in Cloudflare workers and Dino, right? So we're getting, there's streams. The web has this concept of streams, right? Node has its own bespoke sort of version of streams, but these other platforms are they have this idea of like native web streams, readable and writable streams. And so we're basically using the web as like our common API surface area. And then whatever server you're running your Remix app on, we're just going to let you use those APIs. So if you're running it on a server that doesn't have those APIs natively, we're going to polyfill them for you. So your code is going to be like ultra portable. But at the same time, we don't want to sort of abstract too much away about the differences between the platforms, right? Because there are different reasons for why you would choose these different platforms. Like if you're running on Cloudflare, you might want to use Cloudflare Workers KV storage. If you're running on Node, you might have like a Redis storage, right? You have different backend architectures. I don't want to take that away from you. So you also have, access to the underlying platform if you need it. Just makes your code a little less portable, but that's fine. If you don't need it to be 100% portable, dig in. Use whatever platform you're on.
But those are things that you could theoretically then abstract in your application, so that if you use like a driver-based model, for example, you can just implement an abstract driver, which you then use and have the concrete implementation specific to your platform.
Absolutely.
But it's nice that you are freed up to do it that way instead of locking yourself into a specific runtime.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think that's a really interesting concept. I've never thought of it that way before, because Node is kind of ubiquitous these days.
Yep.
Mostly, at least.
Yep.
I mean, hearing this from you now and remixing these different platforms opens the eyes, sort of like, okay, so there are other solutions out there that implement maybe a specific subset of what Node offers, but is more akin to the web API than it is to the Node JS API. But it's very interesting to hear that you can use the web API and sort of streamline that experience, not just on the front end side of things, but also on the back end side of things, and use the tools that you know to achieve very, very different things.
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, the
super awesome.
People are doing time is money in the case of so many different types of apps that people are working on. If you're working in e-commerce, milliseconds, depending on this,
it's the difference between a purchase and
exactly
a non-purchase.
and not
Yeah.
exactly.
If it just takes like 100 milliseconds too long, people are just going to skip it.
Yeah, these funnels are very, very specific.
Yeah, and these edge platforms, like their whole premise is like, we're gonna be able to respond to the user no matter what's going on in 50 milliseconds or less. I mean, that's gonna make a huge difference for your business. Like, there's a huge business case for trying to run closer to the user.
Well, maybe
cool.
even doubly so, because it allows companies to see, like, okay, we have this thing called a cloud function, but we are dealing with a lot of issues there because it doesn't fit what we are trying to do all that well, because we are running into issues, e-commerce, for example, with the cold start time, which could be killing to their conversion. You're taking away that pain. So it allows them to free up a lot of ideas that have been shelved because they were simply not possible and not viable due to the technical limitations. I think it's really cool what Remix is doing and trying to achieve them with all these.
Thank you.
Or not, but not. I think it enables people to use these technologies.
It sounds like it still gives the flexibility that you would like instead of being forced into a specific direction. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, that was the whole goal in the name Remix, because I was like, I want you to be able to mix together. Like, you should be able to say, like, oh, I want to use Cloudflare, and I want to pull, I want to use this different database. Like, I'm not going to force you to use a specific database. You want to use DynamoDB, you want to use Redis, you want to use Memcache, you want to use Postgres. Like, it doesn't matter. People ask me, like, well, aren't you going to build like an active record type thing? And I'm like, well, you've got Prisma, you've got Fetch, like you've got really good abstract, you got PlanetScale, you got Firebase, like you've got a lot of different choices out there for your database. Like, I don't see where we're going to really add value there. I think the most value that we're going to add is just by enabling you.
In a way, you have a very pragmatic view on those things. Instead of being dogmatic about what kind of framework you use, you're just thinking about solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
How can we actually build those?
But I think that sets it apart from a lot of the tools, because as you say quite beautifully, it enables you to do what you want to do without having to consider what you're working against or working with in this case.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's super cool.
I think we're spending quite a lot of time. There's one thing I also want to get into.
Yeah,
I was
sure.
talking about before
It's the last
before we started.
question.
It was the progressive.
Oh, progressive
improvement.
enhancement.
Yeah.
Oh man, don't get me started on this.
Yeah, he floated like
We're gonna be here for a long time. We talk about progressive.
Oh, we have about 30 seconds, so maybe you can give the TLDR of your view.
All right, so I will try. So progressive enhancement is a completely different idea. So we've been off on this tangent about servers and cool stuff back end. Progressive enhancement is really all about the front end. So Remix makes some big strides in the front end. I think one of the cool things about our team is we have a lot of different strengths. My co-founders are very focused on the front end. I've been focused a lot on the back end, and we come together and we innovate in both areas. So this idea of progressive enhancement is, web apps have kind of, and web frameworks have kind of gotten to the point now, popular web frameworks have gotten to the point where they don't really work without JavaScript, without a lot of JavaScript. In fact, like the default in something like Next.js is to ship quite a lot of JavaScript to the user, even for just like a hello world. I saw the creator of 11D was kind of like poking fun at Next.js. They had like a tweet that was like, "Hello world," and he's like, this simple Hello World app is like 700K of JavaScript or something like that, right? Just to run this thing in Next.js.
You're for real.
Yeah, no, you can look it up. Yeah, it's put that one in the show notes.
Was it code split? Oh,
I don't even know.
What's HTTP2 optimized?
that'd be sin number 2, right? Hello World and 700K in a single file.
Yeah. Well, it's just because of the approach that they've taken, right? Is not progressive enhancement. So what is progressive enhancement? It is, let's ship HTML and CSS to the client, obviously, right? Let's ship that's the baseline. Let's also ship some JavaScript, but the JavaScript is not going to be required for the baseline experience. So everything on the page should already work before the JavaScript even gets there. So for example, if the user's on a slow network and the page shows up and they hit the add to cart button, that button's not going to be busted, right? That button, JavaScript might not have loaded yet, but that button is still going to work and submit the form and cause a mutation and add the thing to their cart, right? It's this idea that, JavaScript is used to enhance the page. JavaScript isn't used for the baseline experience. And so all of our mutations and our data loading APIs in Remix are built with progressive enhancement in mind. So you can actually, just for fun, we don't usually recommend it, but just for fun, you could just leave JavaScript off of your page entirely in a Remix app, and everything will still work.
But I think it's gonna look like one of those pages in the early 2000s.
Well,
it doesn't have to, does it?
Because that's the CSS.
That's the CSS. You could
That's
even do
fair enough,
all of the animation could be done in CSS, and your page would still look the same way.
Yeah.
But as you say, I think that JavaScript is the enhancement, right? So it's mostly the interaction side of things.
Yeah.
It should not be the baseline experience, which is a very clear division between. Actually, it's a clear definition of progressive enhancement, I would say, right?
Yeah, it's JavaScript is not required for the baseline. JavaScript is just enhancing the experience. So, not to say that we hate JavaScript. Absolutely not. We love JavaScript. We built React Router. React Router is primarily a tool for building client-side, SPAs, right? Like fully client-side enabled apps. We just don't think every app needs it or should even require it, right? You're building lots of different kinds of things out there. So anyway, I would just say, I know we've talked a bunch. We don't have a ton of time, but that's my short idea of progressive enhancement. So Remix is very, very focused on progressive enhancement. So if you are somebody listening to this podcast, you've been developing apps for 20 years, you remember that phrase from a long, long time ago, because this used to be a very popular thing. If you read like A List Apart, I think was the first, was like one of the old blogs where they first talked about this idea. We're not inventing this idea by any means. It's not been very popular lately with the frameworks that are out there. And me personally, when I saw, what was going on in the React framework space, and I saw people ignoring progressive enhancement and forcing people to download lots of JavaScript before anything would happen on the page, I thought, this is hurting users. This is hurting users. This is hurting businesses. We can be way better than this on the web if we just focus on progressive enhancement.
I like it, man. Like it's from front to back. Both is just so focused on pragmatic solving the problem.
I think Remix is a tool to really keep an eye on.
Thank you.
From the sound of it,
Really
this
cool.
is something that could actually be a game changer in the way we see how to use these technologies and how to get the most out of them.
Yeah,
Not just from us, from a technical perspective, but also for the businesses that we are trying to solve particular problems for.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we're going to have to call it quits today.
Well, hey, man, thank you so much for having me on. It was such a
super
pleasure.
nice.
Thank you for being here, man.
Thank you for being here. It's been a really, really interesting talk. Again, after every single talk, we're like, wow, so
We're
many
lucky.
cool things. So
Yeah.
cool, so cool. Thank you so much for coming on.
All right, thank you guys. Take care.